Now we're going to do the same problem, but now we're going to look at compositions. So remember that this fog thing, right? F of g of x is equal to f with g inside of x. So what we really want to look at is what is the domain of this? And the way that we figure it out, we want it to be really restrictive. So we want the domain of the inside function. So whatever I'm plugging in, I'm going to find the domain, and then I'm going to merge it with the domain of the entire function. Okay, so let's do this problem. So let's first try to figure out what f of g of x is. So fog. So this is basically just telling me go ahead and plug in g of x, right, into f. So I'm going to plug this entire x minus 3 into this x. So what I'm going to get, I'm going to still get the square root of x, square root. And now in the x, I'm going to plug in this x minus 3. So I'm going to put it in blue. So this thing, I'm going to put x minus 3. And that is going to be my answer. I have nothing else to do. Now let's go ahead and try to figure out the domain of this. So the domain of this particular function, right? So it has to be in two steps. The first step is finding the domain of the inside function. Now my inside function in this case was my g of x. And my g of x is just x minus 3. And like we said, a polynomial just has a domain from negative infinity to positive infinity. Okay, so that's my inside function. Now, my second thing is that I need to figure out the domain of the entire function, right? So I have right now f of g of x is equal to square root of x minus 3. Okay, so I need to make sure that the radicand is greater than or equal to 0. So this one is always going to be greater than or equal to 0. I'm going to solve for this, add 3 to both sides. X is greater than or equal to 3. Okay, so right now I have from positive infinity all the way to negative infinity. And this one I have starting at 3, including it, and going all the way to infinity. So what is my domain in this case? So putting all these two together, right? Finding the what they have in common. This is going to be from 3, because it starts at 3, all the way to infinity. This is going to be my domain of f of g of x, which is just what I just found. Okay, so that was the first one. Now let's say I wanted to find the other one. So let's say I wanted to figure out gof, g of f of x. So in this case, I am going to plug in f of x into g. Okay, so g is x minus 3, right? So it's just x minus 3. That's basically just this part. And when I'm going to plug into the x, I'm going to plug in the square root of x. Okay, so the square root of x, because this is my inside function now, I'm going to plug in the square root of x, which is just basically square root of x minus 3. Okay, so now let's find the domain. The first thing that I want to go ahead and do is find the inside function. The inside function in this case now, it's f of x. F of x in this case is square root of x. So I'm going to have square root of x because that's my inside function. My domain in this case is just going to be x is greater than or equal to 0 or from 0 to infinity. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and look at, g of f of x. And that's just square root of x minus 3. Now notice that the domain of this is exactly the same because this part, well, this minus 3 is not going to really affect it. It's just taking the domain of this portion. So x is still greater than or equal to 0. So the domain is the same thing. So basically, the domain in this case is from 0 to infinity. And this is for or of g of f of x. So notice that the domains are very different for both of them. One of them was from 3 to infinity. The other one was from 0 to infinity. So just as a reminder, make sure that you take the domain of the inside function and take the domain of the entire function.